Ron Purser, welcome to the show. We've been talking before the show even started about shortwave radio and ham radio and stuff that like we used to nerd out to as kids. But like for people who don't know Ron, he is, I reached out to him because I saw a recent article in The Guardian about a guy named Jay Shetty, who's one of these online gurus, and I read it with great interest. And you were cited, Ron, as the author of McMindfulness, and you're a professor of management at San Francisco State, correct? And also an like ordained Zen priest. Like you practiced the Dharma for a long time and have commented on how our sort of social structures, our business structures have co-opted in a way, have kind of pulled out one aspect of this beautiful process and tradition and turned it into something that makes a worker feel like they're more productive and that it's their responsibility to feel more productive. And it hits as a doctor because there's a lot of folks in management, in medicine who are like, maybe the burnout thing is a problem. Ron, you're just not resilient enough. Maybe if you meditated, took a mindfulness-based stress reduction course, read some John Kabat-Zinn, did those kind of things. And then I looked at some of your stuff and you're like, he took a shit on John Kabat-Zinn. Nobody does that. And I was like, well, you got to come and talk with me.
Okay. Well, that's quite an introduction. But yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, let me just say right off the bat that, as I say in the book, that I'm not against mindfulness, right?
Obviously.
I'm not against meditation and mindfulness practice, even if it is clinically beneficial. I'm not. But I had a concern about how it was being co-opted and how it was being sold and how it was put to use. Because I'm in management, I was more interested in how it was being used in corporate settings. So that got my attention. But you're right that the way it's been extracted and decontextualized, you could say, from a 2,600-year-old tradition, and kind of scientized and psychologized, and instrumentalized, and turned into a standalone technique that is kind of completely divorced from any ethical and moral sort of framework, that really started to concern me. But I saw it happening, slowly, and then all of a sudden, boom, it like took off.
What was the transition point for that, do you think?
I think the real transition point for that was when the science got really behind it. You began to see this exponential curve in the number of clinical and scientific studies that were, some of the research was good, but a lot of it was questionable.
Yeah.
That's another topic. But it was Time magazine, I think, 2014, that had a special issue, and on the cover of it was this blissed out, almost like photogenically perfect blonde. And it was called the Mindful Revolution, and was a whole sort of, that to me is when, the genie was let out of the bottle, basically. Because, as I said, I think that where it started out and its original intention was for people that had chronic pain, chronic stress. The doctors said, I don't think I could do much. Why don't you go over to the stress reduction clinic that Kabat-Zinn was running at the time? He renamed it. But in 1979, that's really where it all started, in the basement of the hospital that he was in. And it was great. It's just that it sort of got legs. And once it got legs, it became even more distorted and more co-opted and commodified. And once it became commodified, all the spiritual entrepreneurs started salivating. They said, well, I think I could retool. I think I could be a mindfulness consultant or mindfulness trainer. And
a physician coach, that we see this quite a bit. Yeah.
It's also
nothing wrong with that, but yeah, there is a certain aspect here.
There is. Yeah. And so what happened is that it took off, especially in the corporate world. And you know, we're, pretty close to Silicon Valley here. So I kept an eye on what was going on, and I started getting irritated, pretty irritated.
Hey, wait, I thought you were a Zen priest. What is this irritation, man? Everything is emptiness, bro.
Well, yeah, that too. But there was irritation.
Yeah.
But I, for a lot of my writing, I get really motivated when I get angry.
Yeah, me too.
But I think for a good reason. And there was so much hype at that time, and it was getting, the media just ran with it. This is your brain on meditation. This is your brain on mindfulness. And look at these fMRI images, and obviously, I think even 60 Minutes had this is later, but 60 Minutes had a special when, Anderson Cooper is, going into the, brain imaging lab and
counting his breaths.
Yeah. But on the other hand, I was also concerned with how it was beginning to look as if that mindfulness was a stand-in for Buddhism, that mindfulness now was the essence of the Dharma. It was
the Dharma is the truth. Yeah.
The Dharma is the truth. That the essence of the whole Buddhist tradition could be encapsulated into this one technique called mindfulness. And I said, well, all right, it's crossed the line now. I have to start writing about this. And so I did. I started out with just a real modest little article in the Huffington Post in 2013. It was like 1,100 words. It was called Beyond McMindfulness, and it went viral. And so everything kind of changed from there.
Well, oh man, there's so much in what you said that we could kind of tease apart, and I think people will have questions that will arise. Like,
sure,
but wait, what's wrong with taking a piece of Buddhism, which is really a religious tradition, and taking out the secular bits, secularizing them, sterilizing them, sciencizing them, saying, oh, no, this is actually an ancient tradition, and here's the wisdom of it. You don't have to believe in past lives or have to meditate for hours and hours a day. You can just dip your toes into the breath, and guess what? The side effects will be you'll crush it at work, you'll be less stressed, you'll be less reactive, and you'll be able to tolerate a ton of abuse because, hey, you're so present.
Well, yeah. Well, that's the clinical benefit argument that mindfulness is a very beneficial technique for stress reduction. It is a beneficial technique for lowering, one's anxiety and being able to adapt and being able to cope in very stressful environments. So yeah, let's concede that it is beneficial. It's a palliative. But when you go so far to say that this technique is the essence of a 2,500, 2,600-year-old tradition, well, there's something wrong with that claim. And that is kind of overstating and discounting, you could say. It's a form of epistemic violence in a way. Because you're basically saying, okay, we Westerners here, we're rational, we're scientific. We don't want all that Asian mumbo jumbo, all that quaint, superstitious, they're just cultural accretions, We don't have to even worry about anything like that because we know what's right. We have science. And so, we're going to extract this tool and apply it for particular purposes. Now, here's where the genie got out of the bottle. Is you began to see mindfulness as a standalone tool being deployed in the U.S. military, for before soldiers went to Afghanistan at the time, before they went to Iraq. You began to see it used in inner city public schools. These were kids that are, really struggling because of the disadvantaged conditions that they're living in, very, struggling with, the neighborhood that they're, very violence in the home, and they're coming to school.
Intergenerational trauma, all of it.
Intergenerational trauma. And you have white saviors coming into these schools, teaching them this technique. Now, you just need to calm down.
Yeah.
Right?
Focus on your breath.
Focus on your breath. Calm down. Stop acting out.
Find your center.
Right. And so, instead of educating people, I mean, that was a kind of a teaching moment, a possible teaching moment in these schools where they could have said, hey, let's see why you're angry. Let's use mindfulness, but also use this as kind of a process for understanding the social context and understanding the economic and political oppression, the structural forces of oppression. But they didn't do that. Instead, it was just like standardized testing. No, you're going to be an obedient, conforming student in this very toxic environment. The same with corporations.
Oh, absolutely.
The same with corporations.
And healthcare and all of it.
Okay, you're stressed out. You're working 60, 70 hours a week. You have a bad boss, threat of layoff.
Declining wages, higher inflation, poor retirement savings.
Yeah. I mean, Starbucks is a great example too. I mean, the baristas, their hours were cut, so they lost their health care.
Yeah.
And so they banded together a while back and kind of wrote a petition to management saying, hey, we need our benefits back. We're understaffed and we're stressed. We can't handle it. And they said, oh, we can take care of that. They gifted them a Headspace meditation.
Headspace is a meditation app.
A meditation app.
A lucrative one, I imagine.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to say this: substitute the word barista for the word nurse, and you have the same exact thing that's happening in healthcare. Oh, we're understaffed. Our benefits have been cut. We're working more hours. This and this and this. Oh, here's a mindfulness class or a Headspace app or a subscription to 10% happier, whatever it is, right? And it's a pacifier or a almost an opiate for the masses in a sense. Like, let us continue to be incredibly unethical, immoral, and broken in the way we treat you as a worker or as part of this team, purported team. And in return, we'll give you this ability to tolerate it. It's almost like we'll shoot you up full of this drug that will allow you to take the pain. Yeah. And we do that. We've done that with soldiers, right? With drugs.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So in a sense, because people will say, well, what's wrong with that? No, this is what's wrong with it. Is it part of what's wrong with it? It perpetuates this.
Yes.
It perpetuates the brokenness. So I did a video in 2019 called "It's Not Burnout, It's Moral Injury," and it was exactly about this in healthcare. The administration and so on. They're actually, and by the way, nobody is evil in this. It is just ignorance, it's blindness. It's saying, okay, we're getting paid to do this thing. We're going to do it better. So what do? They say, well, you're encountering burnout, which means you're not resilient enough, which means, you're just not adapting to this new electronic health record that makes you look at the computer instead of a patient's eyes. You're not adaptive to our payment model, which pays you to do things to people instead of for them. It doesn't pay you to sit and prevent disease. It doesn't pay you to sit and feel out what trauma is actually driving the behavior that's driving the drinking, that's driving the hypertension. None of that, none of the root causes. And so we know that humans are moral creatures, but we don't care. So we'll take the ethics and morality out of it. And here's a tool. Here's some meditation. Here's some essential oils, some other stuff that used to be considered woo-woo in healthcare. But you know what? If it acts as a placebo for them and they feel like they're doing something and rewiring their brain and neuroplasticity and using the medical terms and the science terms from the fMRI data that's sketchy, then let's do that and suck it up. And instead, people are like, no, I'm having an actual kind of injury every day I go to work. It's a moral injury. It hurts my soul to know that I could help someone and I can't. I don't have the tools, the teams, and the trust to do that. And instead, you're telling me, here's mindfulness. Oh, and by the way, it's taken from this great tradition of Buddhism, which you don't have to believe anything about ethics or morality or even the nature of reality, which is what Buddhism was pointing at,
right.
That there isn't a solid self, that all of this is space and appearance, and we are radiant love ourselves. Forget about that. Here's follow your breath and you'll be a nice, good worker bee for a long time. Yeah,
exactly. And it's all about trying to self-optimize the individual. It's part of our capitalist neoliberal sort of paradigm that the individual has to take complete responsibility for their health, happiness, and well-being. And you have to mindful up. You have to mindful up. You have to have a mental edge in whatever it is.
Yeah.
You have to hack.
Yeah, biohack.
The idea
neurohack.
of hacking and neurohacking.
Yeah.
And it's, the self needs an upgrade.
Mm.
And not only that, but it deflects attention away from those very issues that you're describing that are contextual, that are structural, that are systemic, that are policy-based. So, I come from the field of, organizational development and management. And I had very high ideals that we can actually humanize organizations, whether they be hospitals or corporations. And the way we entered an organization was, who's the client? Is the client just management? Or is the client also the employees and management? So we tried to take a really broad perspective on who we were serving, very idealistic. But the diagnosis was systemic in nature. In other words, let's look at the structures, right?
The context, like you said.
Let's look. Yeah, that's right. Let's look at, the organizational structure. Let's look at the policies of management. Are people given enough autonomy to make decisions, right? Are they really having a say in the policy development of the company? How much democracy? At that time, we were really kind of quite radical. We were trying to democratize organizations so that power was shared, that workers had a real say. But that really never took root because it was challenging the basic tenets of capitalist ownership and management's prerogatives. And so it turned into like employee participation, team building. It made people feel as if they were participating, make them feel as they were part of a family, tight-knit corporate culture, but in a way it was a way of masking the hierarchy, masking the power. So taking this back to mindfulness, I said, I've seen this story before. And it reminded me so much of back in the 1930s. We were ramping up industrialization, mass production, especially if you were like mass producing a particular part. Efficiency was everything. And so you had Frederick Taylor, the father of what was called scientific management, where we kind of fractionate work and dumb it down so one person is doing one job, to maximum efficiency. But people were totally alienated. They were like rebelling, and unions were starting to creep up, and people were saying,
because it sucked. Yeah.
No, we're not. No, we're good. And so there was another movement that came in and said, yeah, people want to feel like they're part of a group. They want to feel like they belong. They want to feel like they're heard. And so there was an experiment done in this manufacturing plant on the west side of Chicago. The Western Electric plant manufactured these little telephone relays, which were essential back then because everything was analog and mechanical. So they put 6 women in this room. It's a separate room from the big plant. And they watched them. They had an observer that watched everything they did. They recorded their conversations. They tracked their productivity. And they were trying to figure out what were the factors that would increase their productivity. So they thought at first it was the lighting. They thought, maybe we should have more light, maybe less light. And they kept varying those variables, and it didn't matter. The productivity went up, no matter whether the lighting was high or low. And then they said, whoa, what's going on here? And these are industrial engineers. And they said, we can't figure this out. So maybe we should go talk to these organizational behavior guys over at Harvard. And they went to Elton Mayo, who is this Harvard professor. And him and his team came in for a little while. And they basically said, the reason why they're productive is because you're paying attention to them. You're paying attention to them, and they feel like they're part of a group. And that was then called the Human Relations School. So then they started training supervisors to be friendly, to be a coach, ask how you feeling. And that became like a charm school for managers.
For managers. Oh, wow.
And what was really kind of weird, that Mayo was kind of this fake psychiatrist, but he was saying, yeah, the reason why these women there were a couple of women who were acting out and they had to pull them out of the room. And they didn't mention that in the official accounts. Like they were going on strike and they were even monitoring the menstrual periods of these women.
Oh my gosh.
That's how invasive it was.
Wow.
But anyway, so what happened was that Mayo was saying, yeah, the reason why you get some of these women who are acting out and, not cooperating is because they have high blood pressure, or they have reveries, fantasies. They're fantasizing, It was really strange. Anyway, it was pathologizing the employee.
Yeah. They're the problem.
They're the problem.
Yeah.
They're the problem. It was nothing to do with the work environment. It was nothing to do with their pay. Right. It was, and I saw this happening with the mindfulness movement, especially when it came to how it was being used in organizations, whether it was hospitals or corporations. It's always blaming the victim.
Yeah.
It's blaming the victim. And I could see why it's so seductive, because on the one hand, there are some benefits on an individual level, but the way it was totally imbalanced to putting all of the responsibility on the individual to adapt and to accommodate to toxic circumstances. And that's where I drew the line. I said, this is not, there's something off here, right?
That makes a lot of sense. And this is what we see in healthcare circles in particular. And it's interesting because when I started down my own journey of like meditation and awakening and all this nonsense, and I say nonsense because these are words that don't describe what this is, but we do have to use words to try to point to this sort of non-conceptual realization. I started talking a bit like this. I'd be like, you know what? We could actually solve some of this issue in healthcare if we just ourselves are more present, are less reactive, are less bothered by these managers, and the managers did the same thing, and so on and so forth. And then the more I started to have realization, the more I realized, no, actually, that's not it at all. It's exactly as you're saying. They're pulling out this one piece and they're using it to try to put all the responsibility on the actual victim in this paradigm, which is the worker, the person who's supposed to be part of a team, is supposed to have a voice, but it's all just fake.
Yeah.
It's really just fake. And it's all the kind of games that you're pointing at that they were studying. Well, if the managers speak in a certain way, and you hear managers talk about this all the time. Oh, yes, I took this course on how to like relate. And then you hear like coaches, life coaches and physician coaches like, well, if you speak to people this way and you do that, and then here's some practices for breathing. And they're not telling you like, listen, like they'll say, oh yeah, the system's a big deal, but you can't fix that. Like that,
right.
That's out of your control.
Mm-hmm.
So let's do what's in your control.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But what is the downside of that thinking, by the way? Well, do what's in your control. Like why not? Is there a downside there?
No, I don't think so.
Right.
Not necessarily, but there's also something beyond the individual.
Right. So does it blind us to what that is?
But when your theory of change is change one individual at a time.
Yeah.
That allows the system to remain as it is.
Yeah.
In my sense, because, why do we have unions? Why are the collective, solidarity, coming together and challenging structures, challenging power inequities? There's a reason why unions came into being. So, and, they're not the most popular entity, but they once were. And we see a lot of kind of comeback of that. Got Amazon, successful unions. Now we see the UAW, Volkswagen in Tennessee won that union drive. Starbucks has been at it.
We're seeing it happen in healthcare in the beginning phase.
Yeah.
But, so there's a tension between this sort of, and this is something too that's decontextualized from the Buddhist or the Hindu Vedantic or even the Christian mystic teachings, the Gospel of Thomas or something like that, where, Jesus was basically pointing to the non-dual nature of reality. It is this one, not two. It's not two. So when we talk about, there's an individual bias in the United States, obviously the country was founded on that. That's fine. That can be accommodated in a bigger knowing that it is all just this one, not two-ness. Yeah. But that's what's partially stripped out. The second thing I think that becomes problematic from a Dharma standpoint, of truth standpoint, is what you said, which is upgrade yourself, self-improvement, self-actualization. Okay, so what is this self that we're teaching workers and doctors and people through these gurus online? What is the self that we're massaging? And the truth is, the deepest two teachings of all these traditions is there is none. It's a religion. I mean, it's a illusion, and it is a appearance. It's a movement. It's not something real. So what you're massaging and what you're trying to reify, make real, and have survive in this separate world of separate objects and separate people and hierarchy doesn't exist. So in a sense, it's taking a one piece of this tradition that's teaching you this and actually using it against the tradition itself.
Yeah, it's a bit of a betrayal, man.
Yeah.
Well, people didn't sign up for that. When people sign up for mindfulness, they're not signing up for that.
That's true. You're right, actually.
But this is also what bothered me, is that I talk about it in terms of what's called code switching. In order to sell mindfulness, right, you have to turn the Buddhist switch off. You have to turn the B word off if you're talking to, or the big D word. You have to turn it off if you're talking to a public school, if you're writing a grant to the federal government,
right?
Even if you're trying to bring it into the corporate world or hospital environment, you'd want to make sure that Buddhist switch is off.
Right.
However, if you're at a conference and you're talking to like-minded peers, you're at Wisdom 2.0 or somewhere, in that conference in San Francisco,
bunch of spiritual folks. Yeah.
You turn that switch on.
Yeah.
Because now it's a cultural cachet. It's the exotic Oriental monk. It's
the Dharma, capital D.
Yeah, it gives you that marketing. This comes from the ancient East, and the wisdom, is now encapsulated, in this app. All of the Buddhist tradition. I used to be a former monk and I invented this app. So obviously you're getting the full transmission of the non-dual wisdom traditions through this 3-minute.
Updated weekly as through the App Store on iTunes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
it's disingenuous because they want to have it both ways.
Right.
And
here's a question though. How many people who are doing this, who are selling this, who are pushing this actually have an ongoing realization minute to minute of the illusory nature of self and the oneness of all reality? And you would wonder that because it's very hard. This is a thing that probably worth just mentioning. You can have real realizations on this journey. And even with the McMindfulness approach, you can sit in meditation following the breath, thinking you're going to optimize yourself and you're going to be a little less reactive. And then suddenly everything stops. And you see the impermanent, selfless, and insubstantial nature of reality in this moment. And it's beyond the descriptions. Everything I just said is nonsense. But then you come back and you don't even know what to do with it because you have no context, you have no tradition,
what happened?
You have no group. Yeah, what happened?
Yeah, you're on your own. And no, this is absolutely right. And it's a concern, I think, of some clinicians.
Yeah. You can get committed for having a full-blown awakening.
Absolutely.
Derealization, depersonalization.
That's right. One of my acquaintances, colleagues, Willoughby Britton.
I know Willoughby.
At Brown, she's been concerned about this phenomena, the adverse effects of mindfulness and meditation for some time. And she's so diligent. She keeps her head down and she doesn't like doing interviews, but she really wanted to get her ducks in order in terms of getting the empirical studies behind her. And I think she's there now because she's starting to talk a little bit more about it publicly.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right that even on retreats, no, I'm like shocked if someone has never done meditation and they just sign up for like a 10-day
Goenka retreat.
Yeah, I like, whoa, and some of these people have really had some crisis. And oftentimes the teachers say, "Oh yeah, just keep meditating." Yeah.
What's the cure for an illness? More of what caused the illness in the first place. Like meaning unsupported meditative insight without any context, support, container, or tradition.
Isn't that iatrogenic?
Yes, iatrogenic. That's right. Thank you for using my language, Ron. But yes, and so, okay, let's talk about this because this was actually something I wanted to ask you about. So recently there was an NPR article on these vipassana retreats. Vipassana is a kind of insight meditation. You're following the breath, you're doing body scanning, and the hope is that things will quiet down in the mind enough that certain insights will arise into the nature of reality. Now, when you have the McMindfulness industrial complex, one of the side effects of that is people will hear, oh, a little mindfulness is good to help me with these things. And then I read somewhere that, oh, you can go on these retreats. And the way that most people think about retreats is this is a stress reduction place where it's going to be this like a spa scenario. And I'm going to come out like so relaxed and be able to just dive back into work as my separate self and just crush the game. And they go to a retreat where it's silent. They're following their breath. Strong unconscious materials arising, childhood trauma, intergenerational trauma, the most horrible kind of experiences humans can experience that have been repressed by our mind structure through thought and distraction for our life now are arising, and they arise in an unsupported context. You're supposed to be silent. And if you have a problem, you can talk to one of the guides and they'll say, you know what, this is all just appearance. Just sit with it.
Right.
And their entire body is screaming, no, it's not appearance because it's encoded in me as trauma.
Right.
And then they may have an insight of, I don't exist as I thought I did. And then their whole worldview is crumbling and they have no support. And it looks like psychosis.
It does. Yeah. And I think that kind of comes to something I've been thinking about is that I'm not so sure the West is really a place for meditation. I know that sounds a bit blasphemous.
This is provocative. Do tell.
I mean, meditation was really reserved for, even in a monastery, very few monks would actually be spending a lot of time in meditation. Let's take the Tibetan tradition. That was reserved for sort of like a very few.
It was a PhD class of.
Yeah, it was like post-PhD.
Yeah, postdoc. Yeah, right. Dzogchen and that. Yeah,
but think about it. Here you are sequestered. Some of these Tibetan monks were sent to the monastery when they're 8, 9 years old, and it's an educational institution. Their whole life is supported by the monastery and by the lay people who are providing for the monastery, who are helping the monastery, food and, Anyway, there was a whole social system that they're embedded in. And hours and hours of meditation for the elite monks. The context in which they're meditating is inseparable from the meditation. In fact, the context is constitutive of the meditation itself. In other words, they are immersed in deep study of the nature of reality through doctrinal teachings such as, doctrines on the nature of mind, doctrine on the nature of emptiness, dependent origination. These are all Buddhist terms, but the point is that they're meditating in a very supportive educational context. Their whole life is devoted to that. And here we are in the West, where meditation has only been, actively around for maybe 100 years. I wouldn't even say that much. I would say
not even that long. Yeah.
The 60s, with Alan Watts coming on the scene, and Zen was very popular. And
Suzuki and
but we don't have that big of a monastic tradition in the West.
Right.
At one time, in the West, the Christian monasteries were quite established, and we had Christian mystics. But that's another story. But I think the point I'm saying is that we're in a Western culture where the sensibilities are sort of at odds with meditation. We have a very highly accelerated culture in terms of time. We're rushing, we're speeding up. We have to work. Our lives are, preoccupied with family and raising children, getting a career. It's not the ideal conditions for, I think, meditation. And, even if we have a practice, let's say, even if you're really a good meditator and you could practice 2 hours a day, which is a lot for the average person.
It's a lot, yeah.
I don't even think that is really conducive to a path of a path of awakening, as we would, put that in quotes. I think there are other ways that as Westerners that we might be more attuned to or more suitable for, that don't necessarily require long periods of isolation. We're already isolated. We're so isolated as Americans, and in a loneliness epidemic. I mean, a lot of these vipassana, I interviewed someone who did her sociological dissertation on vipassana meditators. And, their spouses, their family, like, why are you going off this 10-day? We never see you. You're at work, and now you're going off on a 10-day retreat.
Yeah.
But there's all kinds of issues like this about integration.
Yeah. You're trying to integrate things that don't integrate.
It's very difficult.
It's difficult. But okay, so let me ask you this, because I've been a victim of this. Like, I've gone on retreat and come back to a wife that's very upset with me. But then there can be these shifts of insight where you realize you do have a group of people that support you. You may have found them on YouTube. You may have found them on Facebook.
Yeah.
And they're having the similar insights, similar shifts called awakening. And then they're doing this emotion work and the shadow stuff. And then they're reading the Buddhist texts. And then they're finding a group and they're talking about dependent origination, or they're taking a different tradition and unpacking it, or they're working on koans, in the Zen tradition, or they're reading the Heart Sutra and they're feeling into it. And their retreats are, in a sense, even some of the semi-silent ones are group sanghas. They're group of people coming together. And then in the West, then they go back in the world. And the most common question is, because of this culture, oh man, this all was great until my first day back at work and the manager started yelling at me and I was expected to be productive and I was treated as such a separate thing. And there was no, they thought that I was on retreat for like a mental health day. And they didn't realize that most of that retreat was spent feeling childhood trauma and emotions and crying and weeping and sobbing. And that was the work. And I'm exhausted. My body, mind is exhausted. I'm like, and so it can be very fragmented. But at the same time, I don't know, to play devil's advocate, is there a way, not through the McMindfulness route, but through some other route, that we could incorporate this? Because I think more and more people seem to be having these shifts, partially motivated or partially instigated by the catalyst of YouTube, where, as before, like you said, you had to go to the top of the mountain, find the Dzogchen master, and he'd tell you to fuck off because you hadn't done 10 years of vipassana already as a monk. And now it's like people are seeing like somebody like Angelo DeLullo pointing and they're having, all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, I had this big shift and now I don't have necessarily a container. Then they find it somewhere. But curious what your thoughts are.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I think we're in a secular age. We're in a completely different environment where, at one time we had religious institutions that provided that community and offered solace. But those have crumbled, and the largest demographic now are spiritual but not religious.
Right.
And so traditional religious institutions are probably, with the crumbling of that, we're sort of like DIY. We're sort of a DIY kind of, and we have so much now, as you say, with the internet, that so much information, so many possibilities of different teachings from different traditions, That's good. And I think it is having an effect on sparking people's interest that, yeah, we may be in a secular age, but we're still feeling something is missing. We're still yearning. Religion, I think religio means to bind together. We still are seeking wholeness. And we feel as if it's somewhere else, that something is missing. So I have to find it. I have to seek it. And there's plenty of people in the marketplace offering various. Okay, there's plenty, and some is very genuine.
Yeah.
But overwhelmingly, it's a potpourri. It's a cafeteria.
Yeah.
So we're in this interesting state of affairs where there's great potential. There's great potential because people are yearning.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the wellness industry as a whole globally is $4 trillion. And the mindfulness industry is about $2 billion. But here we are in the sense that we don't have traditional religions, which at one time, even they were sort of questionable in terms of what they really offered. Because people back then were also feeling lack. And it's like, oh, okay, just believe in this and you go to heaven, you're going to be fine. But
Buddhism too. Yeah.
And Buddhism too can definitely play to that game. So I think we're at I don't know if we call it crossroads, but I think we're at an edge of some sort where we do have the opportunity to question differently what the path may look like that is not going to be anything like Buddhist traditional paths or anything. I mean, we definitely are inheriting the wisdom of those traditions, and we can learn vast, in terms of a vast storehouse of these adepts who codified this tradition. So many schools. There's not even one Buddhism, so it's not monolithic.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And so we have. Even those are sort of subject to decay and we're kind of losing, we're losing that to some degree too. So what do we have to rely upon? I say we rely upon our own mind, our own knowledge, and use the best of Western sensibilities, which is critical intelligence, the ability to question, the ability to have sustained, almost like a scientist, sustained investigation of the very nature of reality. We saw that, people like Krishnamurti was sort of like that, but he was, he came from an Indian tradition, and I'm not a Krishnamurti fan, but that sort of questioning, I think, is living the question is a new path of inquiry. So I think it's more of a path of inquiry than a path of meditation. However, I think that meditation is a loaded word. We have images. Oh, it's sitting on a cushion. It's. I think we kind of have to loosen up our notions, our preconceptions of, what is meditation? It's not a thing. It's not a technique, although there are techniques. But you could say that meditation is basically what's happening, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the meditation.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome.
But I mean, that's a big leap to say that.
It is, and it isn't, because it's true, absolutely. But okay, I'm going to unpack a little bit of that journey you just took us on. So, okay, we are conflating certain terms like meditation, awakening, this kind of thing. The meditation that we're reducing in McMindfulness is just a technique.
Yeah.
It is just a decontextualized technique, like, say, looking in a microscope at something under oil at high magnification. That's one technique. Great, wonderful. But what we're talking about is knowing what reality is, finding relief of suffering, noticing the love and connection you have with all beings and all even inanimate objects that aren't really objects, and seeing reality. And so that inquiry, the West in particular might be yearning for the truth that points to. They know it deeply, but they don't know how to go there, because with the death of religion, I just had a guest, Britt Hartley, who talks about leaving the Mormon church, going through nihilism, loss, alienation, not having a structure to replace it, and then finding it in the Venn diagram between the religious wisdom traditions, the atheist skepticism, and the sort of new agey occult, like, energy practices and things like that. And finding that all of them can actually be found in direct experience as a spiritual avenue. And so this idea of being spiritual without religious then shows up as this new expression. What can derail that is a reductionist culture that's based on money, that says, okay, here's McMindfulness, here's a wellness industry, like you said, that's trillions of dollars. Here's a mindfulness industry that now reduces this to self-improvement with a little lip service given to the actual context and tradition. And it's hucked and sold by people that often you can feel in 5 minutes, if you're sensitive, and go, this is someone who is not a selfless individual, but has a spiritualized ego. So they've had some insight, but now the ego's come back and owned it as a power.
Ego inflation
And spiritual ego. And so you see it in gurus that fall off the rails, that are sleeping with their students, that are forming cults, and so on and so forth. This is very common. So now in the West, we have this opportunity. Like you said, we're on this knife's edge. People are having these insights, and what they might need is a consortium of a skeptical, science-based, very Western approach to investigate them. And I love what you said. It's inquiry. It's looking.
I also think the issue is that kind of the worldview or the vision of reality that we've inherited from scientific materialism has, led to a lot of the nihilistic problems. Because we're basically told that we can't trust our subjective experience, so-called subjective experience, that your consciousness doesn't even exist. It's just you're just a piece of meat.
Yeah.
And that leaves people drifting. That's not the most you could say comforting worldview. I'm just this little speck, in meaningless universe. So our vision of reality has kind of been hijacked to such a degree that now we have this gaping collective wound, not just personal. That we're all wanting to. I mean, look at the global crisis that we're in.
It's a shit show.
Poly crises.
The meta crisis. No meaning. No community.
Mental health. Climate change. Name it. These are all interrelated, intertwining. Because our way of seeking fulfillment has been by trying to extract. Now, extract not only from material resources, but we're also seeking experiences. We're always moving. We're always wanting, okay, I feel like there's something wrong with me. There's something missing. And if only I had XYZ, that XYZ is somewhere else. And so that has a particular kind of temporality to it.
It's in time always. It's
always forward directed.
Moving forward,
Moving forward. It's kind of a friction involved in that.
And that friction we like to call suffering, I think.
Yeah, but I was thinking this kind of strange thought that it's almost like it's a friction that causes heat. And it's like, is it no coincidence that one of the reasons why we're experiencing global warming is because we're such consumers. We're consuming, all these material goods, which of course are extracting, from the earth, all the minerals and oil and petroleum, whatever it needs to make products. But I think that friction is also not just physical. Yeah.
And people,
I know I'm going
no. This is where I like to be. Yeah. So this idea, because it comes back to this collective wound that you talked about. There is and I'm increasingly convinced of this through direct experience, because now what you said initially, which is in the Western Enlightenment view that we are stuff that emerges this consciousness. Consciousness is a byproduct of stuff. It's almost an accident.
An epiphenomenon.
An epiphenomenon of this dead matter. Okay, great. Well, the dead matter, if that's the case, is experiencing this moment.
Right. How do you account for that?
How do you account for that? You can't. Not by any science we currently have. The second thing is there's a collective experience that sums up that we don't have necessarily always direct access to, but it shows up. So the feeling like when my father passed, I could feel him. Like it was absolutely clear. When there's a big disaster in the world, often that night I don't sleep and something's wrong and I feel energetically off. The next day I read in the news that, 2,000 people died in a landslide or something. Now, I'm probably just making stories up, but maybe not. And I tell you, on retreat, it seems like you can access other people's tension and emotions quite directly. So here we are trying to pretend we're separate. We're trying to create a society that runs on extracting and separation. And of course, it's going to generate this byproduct of heat and suffering and misery. And so then we go searching, and we search using the model that broke us.
There you go.
So we're searching using the same acquisition model for mindfulness. So we go, okay, now this is a tool for optimizing productivity and preventing burnout, which is a failure of your system, a failure of your dead matter to just adapt to something that's inevitable. The electronic health record, which has forced you to now look at a computer instead of a patient, for example, just one example, or a payment model that makes you do things to people instead of for people. And all of it is so inequitable. You see when you walk by a homeless person, you feel it energetically. It doesn't matter what your politics are. You may say that person was responsible for how they got there and it's not my problem and they need to get a job. Fine. You're still going to energetically feel something and you're going to tell a story about it.
Right.
And that energetic connection is what you can explore in this moment. The meaning and purpose is here. As Britt and I were talking about this, the one I was telling you about, it's all here in this moment, this experience. And that's why, so this is stuff folks may not know about you. Like you're serious about the Dharma, about the truth of this. You've studied and practiced it for 40 years in the context of these different traditions. You've turned me on to a couple of really amazing works by Tartang Tuku. It's amazing because he uses it, and he's pointing in at the same thing that a lot of traditions are pointing at, but he's doing it in a very unique way. He's saying, everything can be seen as kind of space and time as a change. So they're all different. And I'm not doing this justice, so I'm going to stop.
No,
but I feel it directly in this moment as a timeless moment that shows up as time, that feels like love, that is empty of substance and therefore has no weight of oppression to it. It's just a freedom, and life is showing up as this. And that's what we lose when we reduce things to a technique and we tell people you're still separate, you're still broken, so fix it with this technique.
Yeah.
Instead of going, this is what the technique's pointing at. Like, put it back in context.
Yeah, I think that was part of my unexpressed motivation.
I could feel it through the writing.
I felt like, wow, there's so much yearning.
Yeah.
There's so much need for the medicine. The medicine of the Dharma, the medicine of healing. There's so much more that could be offered and available. And yeah, okay, it could be a gateway, but it could also be a shut door.
The McMindfulness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, it could show you this, but it could also take someone who might have uncovered the depths of infinity in front of them and reduced it to a fucking McMansion in the suburbs somewhere that you're trying to get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you said it beautifully. Yeah, I think speaking in terms of Western sensibilities, without using religious language, without having to have a doctrine, because that, I think we're beyond that.
Yeah. It's the cultural immune system of the West rejects
Right.
that.
It's
Yeah.
going to reject that. So we need a doorway of some kind. If there is a doorway is just a metaphor, but I think the gateway or the doorway is dimensionality.
Explain.
Because we're in a dimension of some kind, a three-dimensional world with maybe the fourth dimension of time. We share all that. Every human being, every animal, every living creature, we're sharing the same space. There's no denying that. Earth is a big blue planet floating in space. Look at the James Webb photos.
No, that is never sublime.
The inconceivable distances between galaxies. Space is kind of something we ignore because we're more interested in things. We're more interested in objects. We're preoccupied. We're preoccupied, but space is always it's something that we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for space. I mean, this may sound abstract, but it's a fact. So I think that the appreciation of understanding, you could say, ourselves. We really don't have an understanding of mind in the West. We have a lot of kind of facsimiles of what we think mind is.
Computer processing facsimile analogies.
Like yeah. But in terms of, because we've been told, first of all, we don't even have a mind by Western materialists.
Right. It's all causes and conditions in the brain. Yeah.
It's all brain. Yeah. So I think by starting with the basic, the central kind of facets of human experience, space, we're in space, we're embodied. There appears to be distance between us, but space is also connecting us. Right? It's also sort of allowing our presence to be presented. Space is allowing, accommodating all things. The infinity of appearance space is quite an accommodating non-thing, right? It's open. It has a complete sort of impartial, allowing quality to it. And so by becoming more appreciative or investigating that maybe ordinary space is not all there is to space. It's not just an empty container for objects. Those objects also have space. The space permeating those. We all know that from the quantum pictures of reality.
Mostly space.
Mostly space. The whole universe is mostly space.
And an atom is mostly space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But our preference, our education, our ability to survive as biological species, we had to focus on objects. We have to be able to distinguish and make distinctions, and language helps us to do that. Otherwise, how would we survive? How would we know a poisonous plant from an edible plant? But that evolutionary capacity for knowing, when that becomes the dominant way of knowing and there's no other alternative, what happens is space feels very crowded. Because we have an infinity of things that we could know. Infinity of objects or concepts or memories and images, and our whole, we have mental spaces. Our mental spaces become very jammed up and compressed and contracted, and we feel anxious. We feel, pressure. My headspace, just don't have the headspace today, and we even use metaphors all the time, spatial metaphors.
Bandwidth.
Why is it that we want to go to a tall mountaintop? Why is it that we want to go to an open field where we see, I feel so much better. I'm in nature now. Oh, there's some sort of like instinctual, recognition that this is therapeutic. So this entryway is right here. We have space, and now we have to talk about how things move and how we move, and how do we account for activity. The space is kind of serene. It's sort of open, but there's a lot of activity going on. Time.
And this is not time. This is not time in the way that the mind puts time together.
It can be.
It can be. I see. It's accommodative of that.
Yeah, sure.
But the time you're talking about, it seems to me, it sits in its space in flux.
That's beautiful.
Like it's space showing up as you in front of me now in change, constant change, like instance. And that feels like that is time.
Space is accommodating our presence simultaneously, but at the same time, we're each particularized in a particular unique way, because space is kind of a potent open field of possibility in terms of the vibratory quality of space can present an infinity of forms, form and emptiness. Emptiness is form. So it's the beauty of appearance that space is not a static container. It's not a dead void space. It's active, but it's completely unified. It's not, there's no extension though. See, there's no real distance, but we can accommodate distance because we have to survive. So distance is a useful concept.
Right. It's an overlay on top of this infinite. Yeah.
Even our bodies are in space. Our minds are in space. So space is kind of prior to any sort of particular form. So the formation of appearance is time, you could say, but not coming from past time necessarily.
So what you're doing now, and I feel it, like I'm here with you, this is using language and conceptual symbols to point past language and conceptual symbols to what's here now.
Language is not the enemy.
Yeah, that's right.
Language can be very, very obstructive, but we have to say something.
Yeah.
Why do we have the capacity to speak? Why do we have the capacity to create? Speech is kind of a form of creativity.
It's absolutely.
I don't know what I'm going to say.
It's coming from nowhere.
Right.
Yeah. We didn't even talk about what we were going to talk about on this.
No.
And here we are now.
Yeah.
In time and space, talking about space in a way that people don't typically point, and time in a way that people don't point.
Time is it's a little more slippery and harder to kind of grok in a way. But going back to language, I don't think we appreciate just how much language structures our ordinary way of relating to time in terms of dividing it up into segments, past, present, and future. It's a convention.
Is, will be. Yeah.
It's such a, and it's important that we do that. We need that sort of structuring. But this form of time is a bit problematic when it comes to fulfillment. Because if we're always moving from one moment to the next, the so-called present moment is a very impoverished present moment because it's always slipping away. So the so-called be in the present moment, mindfulness, to me, it's trying to freeze up a moving target. And temporarily, you may be able to freeze it up and give you a sense of calm and relief. But as soon as you stop watching the breath and you go about that, it just kicks right back in. So I think going back to inquiry is rather than saying, okay, I want to become awakened. That's my goal. That's what I'm going to do.
Seek.
Right.
Yeah.
So no, let's try to investigate what's preventing us from being awakened. Let's see what the structure of suffering is. What is the deep structure of human suffering? There's a temporality to suffering. It's going from here to there, from this place to the next place. Why? Because it seems like this here is not good enough. It's not good enough. This here is somehow
dukkha, unsatisfactory.
Dissatisfactory. Right.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what my friend David Loy, I really like David Loy's work. I was such a fan of his work from his very first book on non-duality. But he has another book called Lack and Transcendence. It's a really deep book, and it's something I recommend to anyone.
How do you spell his last name? L-O-Y?
L-O-Y.
Yeah.
David Loy. But he has this theory of lack that we all kind of feel incomplete.
Oh, yeah.
And we interpret that as a feeling of lack. But in a way, we kind of repress it, too.
All day, every day. I went to med school to repress it.
We repress it. And then the return of the repressed, well, you can only repress something, but basically we try to overcompensate for that feeling of lack. That's, no, I don't feel quite right. Something's missing. I feel like an imposter. If I only had this bigger house, we have lack projects, as he puts it.
Oh,
or like reality projects, because the self that we're trying to secure is delusionary to begin with.
Right.
The self that we're trying
of course it's lack. It doesn't exist.
We're trying to secure something that's insecurable.
Yeah. And
that creates a lot of existential angst, which, can be very unconscious. Most of us, Ernest Becker, who is a famous psychiatrist, said, I think he was a neo-Freudian. He said, we all kind of repress the fear of death. But Loy says, I think there's even a deeper form. We repress that. Deep down, we feel like we're actually not real.
Ah, that's right. There's a black hole at the core of this.
There's a black hole at the core. And so we need to make sure that we feel real. And so we're seeking opportunities, experiences that we think will fill up a sense of lack.
Yeah.
But it never
You can't
succeeds.
satisfy a black hole.
No.
It'll radiate a little bit of Hawking radiation that you'll call your body and reality and your stuff. But really, it's just an infinite singularity at the core of it. That's why I love your description of space. That singularity that we're afraid of, that we're terrified of, on the most ancestral, primal, deepest human level. It's almost like all of human consciousness has rippled out into this pattern of avoidance of this core of radiant no thing is not the no thing that you fear. It's everything and no thing.
Yeah. We interpret the groundlessness as kind of an annihilation.
Right.
That deep fear, a primal fear. And so, a frontal attack on this, what we think is the self, is often not the best strategy. And I think that a lot of religious traditions, even Buddhism, the self was kind of a boogeyman.
For sure.
The self, look at some of the Christian or
self-flagellation, self-mortification.
Yeah. There's value to this notion of surrender, surrendering the ego, but that doesn't go far enough. And I think that we have to come at it in ways that are much more gentle. We kind of have to sneak up on it in a way that where when things open up, it's not like you're disappearing, you're actually becoming full.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a fullness. It's kind of a vitality. It's kind of, a wellspring of creativity is available. Oh, this clarity is not something that's just a one-off thing in certain moments of time. That clarity is shining all the time. And so it's kind of it's a gradual process in a way. It really is kind of unpeeling the layers of the non-existent onion, you could say. And like you said, we have to use language to point to it provisionally. We have to use language in a way as a skillful means to show or expose our presuppositions. And the more we can kind of unpeel away or dissolve or question all the presuppositions that are constructing, you could say, our sense of duality, our sense of being finite beings in a skin-encapsulated ego body, all of those sort of partitioning, all that sort of boundary making, that all can open up in a way that's gentle, but at the same time, allowing all partitions to be as they are without being obstructive. And so in a way, we're not retreating from reality or appearance. We're engaging it even more fully and creatively. You see, appearance is space, time, and knowledge. They're not behind it. They're not like substances behind it. We're just not appreciating the full capacity of these dimensions as part of our human being.
And that's what you will never find someone selling at a corporate wellness retreat.
No.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful pointing. Wow. Time, space, and knowledge. And all of the space and the time and all of it is experienced here. I just speak from my own experience as there's no separate knower of this. It is knowledge in itself, meaning it is knowingness. And I love what you pointed out earlier, how you investigate what the nature of human suffering is, which is this feeling that there are so many objects cramped in a space that's finite, and we're just, And when you start to see that, no, you can actually open up every single object into its infinite spaciousness, and that space itself is awake. And the appearance itself is self-knowing, and these words mean nothing, but they're pointing.
Right.
Well, then what's the emotional content there that starts to arise? It's very different than the emotional content of anxiety. Or it's actually the same, energetic, but the tone is different. It's no longer worried about future. It's no longer in time. It's now just
Well, it's almost as if so-called negative emotions,
right.
The labels we put on various mental objects, emotional experiences, they could be accommodated in a more spacious way. So it's almost as if we're identifying more with the nature of space than we are with the nature of what's arising as a particular object. But that object is not negated at all. It's not suppressed or repressed or pushed away. It may not last as long because we begin to see how labels freeze up energy. Language has the function of pointing out things, pointing out objects, discriminations that we make. We're constantly constructing what we believe to be these objects and our appearances. But we're not aware that we're doing that. So the problem is, how do we look using, like I think you mentioned this earlier, we don't want to drag the same sort of hardware or software with us that is based on the very kind of dualistic way of knowing.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we look in a way, because the looker is part of this, you could say this readout.
The confirmation of the whole thing, yeah.
Yeah, it's part of the readout. Everything is given together, you could say, simultaneously in this kind of focal setting. We're all operating from like focal settings, like the aperture on a camera. Now, when that focal setting is very narrow, then we're kind of in this kind of pinpointing way of pointing things out constantly.
Mm.
That's this, and that's this, and that's this, and this is this, and this is this, and then we're feeding that back into our mind stream. So our mind is preoccupied by the mental constituents. We could say the flow of experience is cramped. We're preoccupied. We're distracted. We're pulled, to and fro. But that's because we're completely identified with the contents of our stories. We're completely identified with our thoughts, with the content. The thoughts are like carriers. They're popping up like bubbles.
Yeah,
they're
constantly.
Thoughts are not the enemy either.
Yep.
They're like the activity. They're
That's
activity.
Right. Like a little volcano spewing
but
out.
When we become so entranced, in fact, we're kind of in a auto-hypnotic state most of the time.
That's it. It's a trance.
It's a trance. And the trance has to do with time. Because if you really pay attention to your mental stream, you're constantly referencing, remembering, intending. Because that's how we situate where we're located.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here in this moment relative to the future and the past. But that's how the self actually constructs its own sense of delusory bystanderness. It's like a bystander.
Ah, yeah.
It's saying, oh, here I am in time.
Yes.
I'm not time. I'm in time.
Aha.
And the river is flowing. It's moving. It's moving from the past to the present to the future. And at some point, I'm going to hit a wall, and that's called my death. Okay, so let's not think about that. Let's deal with, our day-to-day world. And so the entrancement has a lot to do how the narrative structure of self-identity relies upon linear temporality, that structure of time. And
it has to.
It has to.
It has to. It's the definition of it.
The self, you could say, is linear time.
It is linear time. It's fake time. Or not fake time. It's the appearance that we call linear time.
My friend calls it Franken-time.
Oh, I like that. I like that because it's totally created.
Yeah, and it's the monster that comes back to haunt us.
To kill its creator.
Time feels like a hostile force.
Yeah, it sure does.
Bearing down on us,
Yep.
I don't have enough time. I'm short of time. I'm a victim of time. I'm wasting time.
Time's up. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, in a way, we push the dynamic of time. We kind of compress it into the spatial. It's kind of strewn. It's stretched
it's a dimension. It turns into an actual dimension, physical dimension. Spatialized dimension.
Time.
Yeah.
And then we kind of, it's kind of a GPS thing. We say, oh, okay, here I am.
Yeah.
And we look back at our photos from like when we were a kid or a teenager.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah. That's how I used to be. And see, we change.
Yeah.
We could see our changes either physically or even behaviorally, attitudinally.
Yeah.
Our personality may change, but it's still me.
Yeah.
There's still this sense of continuity. That doesn't change, that we think is permanent.
One of the strange things that happened to me after a recent insight was I looked back at some photos, like past 20 years of photos, digital photos, and I was like, that's not at all what, that. I don't know what that is. Like, it didn't occur to me that was me back then. It was just like another appearance. And the sense of the one moving through time had dropped away. And instead, I like what you said. We act like we are in time,
right?
That we are not time.
Right.
And in a sense, the way you point at time, it may be more true when you look that you find that you actually are the dynamic change that we call time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's paradoxical because it's timeless from the standpoint of that linear time.
Yeah. It is a dynamic, and there are rhythms that varying rhythms of time. But I think you're right that, I've often thought about this, and you being a doctor, I often thought it was miraculous that all of our organs are operating without our conscious thought just perfectly. It's just, there's some sort of timing. I mean, circadian rhythms, all the rhythms of the body that are happening.
Nervous system electrical transmission has a frequency.
It seems like everything is kind of like one wave and then there's subwaves and subcycles and these kind of interpenetrating rhythms. It's kind of just all one kaleidoscopic wave of phenomena. But what we do is we freeze it up and label it as things. We kind of extract it.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like a rainbow. When we all see a rainbow, we conventionally, there's a rainbow. And in language, we all agree, there's a rainbow. But you go right up to it. What's there?
What is that?
Yeah. It's just the causes and conditions that happen to result in
that appearance,
refracted of light.
In a way, this idea of linear time and how we live, the way you described it, it's like we are living, believing the conceptual descriptors of what our experience is instead of the raw experience itself.
We're living in a map.
That's right. That's right. And as we know, maps are not the territory.
Right. And because of that, we feel cut off. We feel cut off from the vitality of these dimensions, you could say. Because we're secondhand. We're kind of, our knowing is secondhand.
It's knowledge. An abstraction.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've abstracted reality. We made a map of it. So how do you experience direct reality? Well, that's the inquiry. That's you look.
Yeah. And so we think, okay, I already know that. I've seen that tree. That's a tree. And so the kind of the vitality of our perception is kind of dulled down in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it's placed in linear time, and then it's placed in reference to an observer that's imputed moment to moment to moment, that's riding the stream of.
Yeah, we're constantly refreshing.
Yeah.
I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm
but
here.
It feels continuous. Yeah. It feels continuous to our childhood. Like you said, you can look at a picture of you as a child. Oh, that's me. Yeah, sure, things have changed, but no, that's me. Look, that's a story. What me is that?
Yeah.
Look right now. Can you even find the me that's here now? You say that's a me. Is there a me here? Like, take a peek. And sometimes I find the inquiry, like, who am I? I find it to be a little tricky.
It could become a language game.
It is a language game, and then you're looking for identity, and so everybody finds their way. But like sometimes it's just look until there's nothing but the looking, and I don't even know how to say it any other way, and then it just starts to click. And okay, this is something that you said I think is so important, and then I want to bring it back to, okay, so what can a floor nurse do who's been sold a bill of goods by McMindfulness, and then we're pointing to this really seemingly esoteric way of looking that's actually quite direct. How will that benefit her in her job, and what? So we'll come back to that. But oh man, what was it now? Now I totally lost my train of thought. And see how that works. There was a continuity.
Yeah.
Like I had a past me that had an idea to ask you a question. And when it just evaporated, it's as if it never existed.
Yeah. And the more you try, the more you won't.
You won't find it. It'll show up.
Right.
It'll show up, bubble up
when
at some point when you're relaxed.
Yeah.
So then let's loop it back then to this question. We're speaking of deep inquiry. We're speaking of looking at direct experience beyond conceptual overlays. We're talking about direct seeing. We're pointing at really the Dharma, like what is, like how is this even what it is? How can that way of talking and pointing help somebody who's struggling in their job, who's so mind identified they don't even know there's another way? And then here are these McMindfulness people that are giving them a way, at least a technique. Help me reconcile, like, what do we, it almost feels desperate, because trying to solve the problems of the mind with the mind in that way doesn't make sense. And by the way, that's what I remember now, what I was going to ask you. Your clear pointing here is nothing is rejected, even the delusion, even the appearance of self, even language, it's all part of this miraculous isness. So when we go to war with those things, who's going to war with them? The same sense of separation, the same imputed ego. So it's a game you can't win in that way. So in the end, it's a radical acceptance.
Ah, I like that term. Yeah. I think there are so many, in the Dharma, in the Buddhist Dharma, they talk about there's 84,000 pathways.
Right. They like to count those ancient Buddhists.
Yeah. So it's difficult to say, oh, this is the way, I think that's not helpful.
I agree.
Sometimes it's just as mundane as you have an intuition that occurs. And that intuition somehow leads you in a different direction. And that different direction somehow leads you to pick up a book. Or that direction, you talk to someone. It's unpredictable. But it seems like the universe has our back, I believe.
Yes, I agree.
I believe space, time, and knowledge have our back.
It's benevolent at the fundamental level.
It's benevolent. It's a beneficence that is the nature of our being. Our being is we're never inseparable. Being is not really a good word because it sounds like it's a thing.
Yeah, right.
Like it's an existence.
Objectifies it, yeah.
But I think that our society and our culture doesn't, like going back to our previous conversation, doesn't support this sort of way of approaching. I don't want to use the term knowledge, but you could say our innate capacity for knowing what's kind of wholesome for us, or knowing what will lead us to becoming less bound by unhelpful habits, less bound by toxic situations. But again, intuition, I think we were talking before we got together about Ian
McGilchrist.
Yeah. Our culture has been overtaken by the rational.
The left hemisphere.
And so oftentimes we don't trust our own nature. We don't trust that we don't need saviors in a sense. In a way, we don't even need teachers.
Yes.
At some level. Yeah. Although, teachers can be very helpful. But when, at the end of the day, it's really our own nature that is the potential for awakening it's always our own nature. And that nature is not something that's locatable. It's not something that's bound up by any particular sort of conceptual framework. And so that's another snag, I think, that maps are useful, but at the end of the day, they're not the territory. So, that's why, in the Buddhist path, once you cross the other shore,
you burn the boat.
Get rid of the boat.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, that was beautifully expressed, because the question I had asked was, what can a floor nurse do in the setting of all this when we're trying to sell her meditation and mindfulness, but she's still suffering and the system is broken? And one thing I want to pull out of what you said, which was so important, is you can actually trust this. You can trust your own experience and intuition in this moment in a deep way. Now, being careful, because there's plenty of ways to self-delude. There's plenty of ways to lie to ourselves. And the recognition of what is that and what is that deeper, I guess in Buddhism, they call it prajna wisdom. It's just this wisdom that comes from direct knowing.
Direct knowing.
Yeah. And it shows up as me picking up my keyboard and emailing you out of the blue and going, something in the Guardian article I read really made me want to come talk to you about this. And again, where is that coming from? I'm not overthinking it.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, yeah, I'm supposed to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think those moments are happening all the time.
All the time.
Yeah. It's almost as if we miss them.
Mm.
We may miss them, but yeah, I think that's a good example. And yeah, I'm kind of.
No, it is, I tell you, when I think about this, because I think about that floor nurse, because there's so many nurses watch our show and how they suffer in their particular way. And then I think of all the delusion and mind identification that I had, particularly when I was younger, and how in that situation, then I would have suffered and suffered and suffered because my manager's a dick. The hospital take advantage of me. We're working overtime. All of that is true. And those systems absolutely need to change and we can't stand for them. Absolutely. So that's part of it. So maybe there's a nurses union, which those exist. Maybe there's personal action. But then what else can she do when she's trapped in mind identification and living as a series of symbols and abstractions? Once she starts to intuit that there's another way, and then she starts to trust the movement that's pulling her in that direction. Maybe it's opening YouTube and finding some video of some non-dual speaker, or maybe it's going to church and feeling what Christ consciousness is, or whatever, going to synagogue and feeling like, what Kabbalah is pointing at, or whatever it is. Then trusting that, because we are very conditioned to have such a core of shame that we don't trust ourselves. And so when we trust something that is I hate to use the term true self. Yeah. But you know what I'm pointing at?
Yeah.
Yeah. Then things can open up in a way. And so telling people, look, your path is your path. Like you said, teachers aren't needed, but they can be helpful.
They can be helpful.
They can be helpful.
They've been helpful to me, that's for sure.
For me too. But in retrospect, it's seen as like, oh, it's so funny because nothing was ever happening in the way that I thought. But it seemed like I needed that to point my mind past itself. And then come back and incorporate the mind in a loving way and go, you know what? You were never the problem. Really?
Right.
Yeah. Because when we go to war with the mind, it leads to even more seeking and suffering.
Yeah. The seeker syndrome.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right.
I know it well.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Searching for land's limits. That's the title of a book, actually.
Oh, is it? Oh.
Yeah. One of my mentors, Richard Dixie, very 2 volumes. It's based on Revelations of Mind, another book by Tarthang Tuku, which is all about coming at this, not particularly from space-time perspective, but more about questioning mind.
Yeah.
And really kind of developing a relationship with our own mind, partnership.
I love that.
Befriending.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of a different approach that calling into question, you could say that we understand. We don't understand.
No.
We really don't understand how mind functions. How does our mind actually operate? That's producing this display, which sometimes is cooperating with us. Sometimes it's pleasant. Sometimes it's unpleasant. But a lot of times we feel that the mind is an enemy. It's not working for us. If I have insomnia, one part of me is not wanting to sleep. It's causing problems. Another part of me is kind of divided. We have a lot of inner conflicts, for example. We have a lot of kind of compartmentalizing, partitioning, that we wall off certain parts of ourselves. And so I think one of the I don't know, I'm going to call it byproducts, but I think one of the benefits is that we really want to become integrated. In other words, it's kind of a full accommodation of our humanness that integrates what we may have disowned at one time. Because we've labeled it and we've frozen it. We've kind of, it has a kind of a repression but all of these are simply energies, which it's almost like alchemy. We think that these may be scary and, overwhelming, but we can, learn how to develop a partnership with our mind in such a way that the normal operators, which are based on I, me, and mine, these are like the gateways of samsara.
Yeah.
Tarthang Tuku talks about these are the gateways.
Gatekeepers.
Gatekeepers.
Yeah, exactly.
The gatekeepers. That's right.
Of the regime of mind.
The regime of mind. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
It's a beautiful analogy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like there's this clandestine, petty governing officials.
Yes.
Right?
Little bureaucrats.
Little bureaucrat.
The I, the me, the mine, and the mind.
And we have like an inner manager.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, inner manager. Oh, you didn't do that right. You didn't do that right.
I mean, he runs in the background even when I interview sometimes. Right. He's like looking and he's going, okay, do I have enough card for this? Is the audio looking good? And he's like, okay, maybe this. And now I see him. I'm like, oh, hi there.
Yeah, and a critic, kind of the whisperer.
Oh yeah, the whisperer.
The whisperer.
That was a great in the book. The whisperer. It's like you're wrong about this. You're wrong,
or you're right,
or better yet, you're right and they're wrong. Yeah, and you're believing this voice in your head. And we in psychiatry we'd call that a schizophrenic voice and a paranoid delusion. But it's the operating system of the human condition. Yeah.
I know. Well, yeah, I mean, in Buddhism, they talk about that's the fundamental delusion.
Yeah. Man,
yeah.
I almost feel like we should stop here because we have done so much.
We covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, we covered a lot. And we went from the very concrete and very good of critique of the mindfulness industrial complex and our society's way of incorporating it into, okay, so what might be other approaches to look at reality and relief of suffering, diving into the esoteric and the beautiful of this.
We did,
didn't we? Isn't that strange?
Yeah, I think that was a nice flow.
Oh, I love it. And now we just say the next time we talk, we'll talk about anything that people in the audience are asking directly about, because now we can pull some questions. And by the way, you have a podcast called Mindful Cranks.
I do.
And you might be taking a little short break while you're finishing a book, but...
Yeah, it's been on hold, but I hope to maybe resurrect it if things work out.
I'll say this. I've listened to some episodes. You have amazing conversations with people that are really... They're unique conversations that people just don't have about this stuff. And it's almost like, in a way, it's kind of the antidote to the McMindfulness industrial complex, or Mick, because you're kind of questioning every assumption, everything. And that's something you pointed out earlier.
Right. Yeah. I kind of appropriated that term when someone called me a crank. One of the mindfulness cheerleaders on social media said, "Hey, he's a crank." I said, "Oh, I like that. Cranks. I like that." But I'm kind of moving away from that in terms of the topics I want to examine.
You covered it very well.
Yeah.
It's like when people ask me to talk about COVID, I'm like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I want to die now. And yet here I am. Hey, Ron, can we talk about McMindfulness? I really love it.
Yeah, I've actually turned down quite a few people. I said, I'm kind of done with that, talking about that.
I'm glad you didn't.
No. Yeah. I knew we weren't just going to talk about that.
Yeah. We talked about the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Stuff you and I really deeply are drawn to.
Yeah.
I could feel it too during the conversation. It's like, holy crap. I'm like right there. And I'm sure there's going to be people listening now that feel it. And there'll be people, honestly, I was thinking, a thought arose, right? The whisperer arose and said, this is esoteric enough that people who were with us for the beginning, they're going to tune out right now.
Really?
And you know what? That's perfect. Part of it.
Okay.
Because we are pointing in a very direct way that I think many people are defended against. It's that same abstract distancing from the core of the core at us, which is this indescribability that we're so conditioned to avoid looking there that it leads to some existential fear sometimes. So some people, when you point directly like that, can get a sense of, and this is just from personal experience.
Oh, yeah.
I've made people very uncomfortable at dinner parties where I'm just like, okay, and I've learned now, okay, I kind of parse it. But the beautiful thing is, that's the great thing about this platform is people can take what they want. And man, the people who are on that ride for that pointing, they're in for something beautiful. Yeah. Ron, thank you so much. I'm so grateful.
Thank you so much for having me, because I have a lot of gratitude for what you're doing.
Likewise, man. Likewise. And we're practically neighbors.
I know.
And so we're going to have to hang out.
We're going to play guitar.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
But the problem is you're actually good. That's the difference.
You might be. No, you're fast. You got the chops. So.
Fast and good are different, though.
We'll see.
It is on. This is basically like Steve Vai versus the devil in Crossroads. I love it. So we'll put links to all your stuff in the show notes. Guys, if you appreciate this kind of work about, the Dharma capital D that we're trying to do, leave a review, subscribe. If you're on YouTube, subscribe and turn your notifications on. If you're elsewhere, I'm everywhere, hit like or dislike and leave a comment, even if it's a negative one, because we want to hear from you. And honestly, between you and me, Ron, it juices the algorithm. And that means everyone can learn from this wonderful gentleman. All right.
All right.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you.
Peace out.